Hey, welcome to the Citizen Mike Show. Thanks for tuning in. We do appreciate it. My name is Mike Brodinski, and on this episode, we're going to have three conversations with three candidates to the Board of Education. Before we get to those interviews, I want to just give you some background as to how and why we're doing this episode the way we are doing it. It all started on Sunday morning when I read the story in the Record Journal. Well, the headline reads as follows. I think you probably read it too. It says, all candidates refuse to take questions in annual forum. First sentence, lead sentence by Lauren Takoris of the Record Journal. Board of Education candidates won't be answering questions during next week's candidates forum hosted by Wallingford Community Women, and instead will have the opportunity to read personal statements. When I read that, I was beyond disappointed. I got to tell you, I was beyond disappointed because the forum has been in existence for decades, I believe, and the format has been, accepted and probably enjoyed by all candidates running for office for years and years and years. That format is, of course, that candidates take their seats in the town council chambers. They're divided into panels, and members of the press, and in the case of the Board of Education candidates, a representative from one of the high schools sits at the desk and asks the candidates questions. And they go down the row, and I think each candidate has the chance to answer maybe 3 or 4 questions each. That was called off. The leadership of both parties, in this case, Republicans and Democrats, the leadership, 3, maybe 4 people, decided to call that off and instead just read these prepared statements, which is a very poor substitute for the old format. You say, well, why be disappointed? Well, because part and parcel of the job of a public official is to be able to present themselves to the voters, to explain the issues, to talk to the voters and tell voters what they think. Voters need to see if they have the verbal skills to handle questions, if they have the ability to explain facts and explain issues. I mean, it's part of the job of a public official in their role as leaders to tell the voters what's going on and why, and to explain to voters why they took the positions they took. So the idea that the Board of Ed leadership would now cancel this forum, to me, was unacceptable. I say, why do we need them in office? We don't need, anyway, it's maybe another episode. So I said, what can I do about it? And of course, Citizen Mike Show can do very little about it. After all, we have just 3 viewers, but I decided to do a special episode. So what I did is I sent an email to all non-incumbent candidates for the Board of Ed, Republicans and Democrats. And the reason for that was that we have a precedent of inviting challengers only, before elections. And the reason why the newcomers are invited and not the old guys is that the incumbents have had their opportunity to be in the press, to be seen at public events, to be seen on television during meetings. They've had their moment in the sun, but the challengers never got that exposure. And this is a small chance, I agree, for the challengers to get that added exposure so they can show their stuff to voters. And that's why we did what we did. Well, sent out these emails on Sunday morning to all candidates for the Board of Ed. All Republicans said, nope, Mike, we're not accepting your invitation to the Citizen Mike Show. The 3 Democratic challengers to the Board of Ed, they all said, yep, we'll go on. Part of the invitation that I sent out Sunday morning stated that I would send topics to all the candidates in advance so they would have some time to focus their research and to prepare. Didn't want to catch anyone unprepared. It's not a gotcha kind of a show. It wasn't an attempt to pick an argument with anyone, but just so that that viewers and voters would have more tools in which to see candidates running for the Board of Ed. So Maureen Reed, Mike Urban, and Jacqueline McFarlane, they all said, yep, we'll come on the show. The Republicans said no, and that's how we ended up with the 3 candidates that we have. One question that I did not ask and I'll explain why in a second. One question that I did not ask is really the issue in the election. That is, where do you stand on one high school versus two? And the reason why I didn't ask it is this. I'm getting conflicting signals as to whether or not a Wallingford School District is supposed to send to the state a population projection, its student population projection, so that the state of Connecticut can determine whether or not it wants to fund or contribute or offer reimbursement to two high schools or one. And I can see the state of Connecticut saying, you don't have a big enough school population to support two high schools. We're not going to be participating in reimbursement to two high schools, but we would with one. And so until that question is answered, if that's the case, it's sort of futile, I think, to ask these candidates the questions about one high school or two. Now, my assumption about this population projection may be wrong. I've asked around, I'm trying to get the basis for it. I'm trying to get authoritative, an authoritative voice to confirm that's what the state wants. I'm trying to get documentation, but I don't have it yet. And to try to fill that gap, I sent an invitation to the superintendent of schools to come on the Citizen Mike Show and to bring us up to date, not on her preference for whether she wants one high school or two, but to bring us up to date as to what the state is looking for and where do we stand on providing the information the state needs. And until that is explained and until the state responds, I think we're sort of awash. Up to now, I think the Board of Ed candidates, members of the Board of Education, I should say, have been talking around this point and I think slow walking it so they can avoid, this during election time. So I'm hoping the superintendent of schools will come on, put that to rest, and progress can then be made on moving this issue forward. And that's why I didn't ask these candidates about their preference on one high school or two, where they probably have opinions. But if the state of Connecticut says we're only going to fund one high school, that's it, right? So with that in mind, let's get to those interviews. And the first one up is Maureen Reed. 3, 2, 1, go. So we have joining us a Democratic candidate for the Board of Education, Maureen Reed. Maureen, thanks for coming on the Citizen Mike Show. Appreciate it.
Oh, I appreciate so much having the opportunity to share my thoughts.
Okay, well, we're going to have some fun. I want to read a little bit from your resume. We have a limited amount of time. It's not everything, folks. It's just what we have time for. This comes from the Democratic Town Committee website in part. You wrote, I've devoted myself to education for 26 years. For the past 6 years, I have been assistant principal of curriculum at Cheshire High School. I spent the 10 years prior to that as assistant principal. I've taught English for 5 years in the Cheshire School District, as well as in the Meriden Young Mothers Program and in the Meriden and Berlin Adult Education Programs. In addition to that, you write, I have taught as an adjunct for Southern Connecticut State University and St. Joseph's University. I earned a doctorate degree in education leadership, creating a dissertation that focused on social emotional learning in connection with anxiety in a high school setting. Let me just go through your degrees and then we'll get down to work. You wrote that you have a bachelor's of science in English. It's from Southern Connecticut, a master's in education from Southern Connecticut, and a doctorate of educational leadership from Southern Connecticut. You earned that in 2018. Did I get anything wrong? There's more to say.
Yep. That sounds accurate.
All right. So let's get down to work. The first topic I want to discuss with you reads as follows. Should board members try to objectively assess how their district is doing? How would you do that? And what would you do if you suspected the school district was underperforming? Integrate, if you would, test scores and their place in this. Go ahead, you got it.
Okay, so I would start by saying that it really is up to the superintendent and the central office administration to assess how the district is doing, and then to keep Board of Ed members informed, and usually through public meetings, so that the community is also aware of how the district is doing, and that should happen on a yearly basis. If communication is really the key to keep everybody aware of what's happening in our community. So if the district is underperforming, it is then the responsibility of the elected officials, Board of Ed members, to really talk with the administration and try to hear out what their plan is to help improve that situation. But I would like to say, as far as test scores are concerned, that it's one piece of assessing the success of a student. That if our curriculum and our instruction and our assessments are aligned to standards, then it would follow that our test scores, standardized, would be successful. And I think, if they're not, that's when we have to further review them. But I also think it's really important that we have a balance between our academic test scores and our success of our students socially and emotionally as they graduate from school.
Yeah, so if the roles are reversed and you were asking me that question, you're citizen Maureen and I'm candidate Mike running for the Board of Education, and you asked me that, being who I am, I'd say, well, what do you mean by underperforming? I mean, what do you mean? What metric? Certainly, educational achievement is one, but there might be other measurements. So my question would be, are there other metrics other than educational achievement? How would you sense them? I'm going to give you some examples in a minute as to what I mean. Is there any way that a member of the public or a parent can look at some rating or some data or something and figure this out for themselves? And let me give you an example as to what I mean. And as you know from the show, I like to be the devil's advocate. One metric might be, I know. One metric might be the physical plant, the condition of the buildings and grounds. All right, that might be one metric of 20, I don't know. And I say by that metric, the current board administration has failed, because all the candidates are going around saying we've got to, things are run down, things are broken, we got to replace them, and they kind of talk around that issue. But I say physical plant, F, failure.
I think, okay, so one is the facilities is one. Another one is the teachers, right? How comfortable are our teachers? How supported do they feel? Because if they don't feel supported, our students are going to might feel the effects of that in their education. Is there parent involved?
I got to stop you there. How would you know, as a board member or a parent? How would you know about that last?
I think. I think, as a board member, I would hope that parents would share concerns that they have. I think that's the way I see the role. Is you're kind of a mediation. You're an elected official to help support parents, students, community, and teachers. But I need to know what's happening in order to address what's happening. I also think, I think parents are a good communication piece to help us to understand what their concerns are, but as well as students. I love talking to students, which leads me to my next point, that I think Board of Ed members need to be in the buildings. You don't just sit on a panel once a month and talk about, or more than once a month and talk about different issues and concerns. You actually have to visit buildings. You have to talk with teachers. You have to talk with parents and students. So I think that's how we know what some of their concerns are about the school district.
Another nuance to the same topic. If we rely too much on the administration to tell us how the school district is doing, is there sort of an inherent self-serving statement that you can expect? And rather than drilling down to the truth, let me be a little more specific. So an administration, let's say, and a board of education owns the status quo. And it would be only human nature to say, of course, we're doing very well. And they'll list all their accomplishments and achievements. And that's the only side of the story you get. And I think that goes on in politics and government and organizations across the country. The bosses say, we're doing great, re-elect us or give me a raise. and it's up to somebody else to weigh in on the other side. Is that person you?
Yeah, I mean, to a degree, yes. I think, and to go back to what you're saying, you're correct. The easiest and best thing to say when you're in that position is we're doing great, right? But that's where I think we go to data, hard and soft data. And I don't mean just test scores. Here's an example. And I know there's conversations in terms of the schools and one or two schools. And one of the points that have been made, and again, I haven't been in on meetings, I've been following along to keep up. But one of the points that was made was, well, we can't afford to run the same course in two different buildings because of the lack of enrollment. So, one of my questions is, where's the data to show us how many students are enrolled in what classes? That can easily be taken out of the computer program, Power School, to show us what can be scheduled and what can't. So by looking at data, that's how we are able to really determine what the concerns are, accurate or not, whether things are going well or not. So that's just one example to address what you're talking about.
Let's change the subject because we have a short segment here, but let's change the subject. The next topic is, that's me, Mike Brzezinski. I've detected in my reading a tension, nationally speaking, between adding resources devoted to programs for the gifted and talented, including advanced placement courses and the like, or adding resources for remedial and or vocational programs. Rephrased, this might be a push and pull between the champions of the A- students and the champions of the C students. So if the board had some added money to put into raising student achievement, where would it go and why?
Well, I really like this question, actually, because, I'll start out by saying that students who are taking our AP courses, our, advanced placement and ECE, UConn courses, they're usually students who are motivated and inspired to achieve or overachieve. So generally speaking, these are the kids that will actually take AP courses outside of the building, pay for them themselves, and, equate it for credit and receive credit on that. So, I think that's one sector. Then we have the other side that you're talking about, and you mentioned vocational. So we have a beautiful ag ed program. We have some great CTE programs in our school system. So looking at that, it looks like that population, as long as, we're not taking money away from those, then we're servicing those programs. And then you mentioned remedial too, which obviously we have interventions in place for tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 students that need support, SRBI, scientific research-based interventions. So all of those seem to have a natural flow of receiving funding, receiving attention, the needs. Where I would like to see extra money put, now this isn't taking away from those segments, but you're saying we have extra money, I would like to see it put towards the middle of the road students. These are the students who don't always receive the attention or the push to really strive, a little bit harder to be more successful. And I think if you give them, they kind of fall through the cracks because they're doing okay. They don't require anything. And I think if you give them programs that support them to kind of, want to push a little harder, work a little bit more, take a little bit more opportunities, that is where I'd like to see the extra money go.
Move on. We're running out of time, but we have time for this one. If there was something specific, or is there something specific that you want to achieve if you were elected to the board, what would it be? And I mean something very specific that you can investigate and research and eventually put on the agenda and vote on. And I say in my topics to you, no fair, broad, aspirational goals. We all want to improve this, that, or the other. I mean, something narrow. Right. What do you have for me?
Yeah, so I really thought about this and I had to kind of formulate it, but my thought is, give it a term, it's called experiential learning, which has been around for years. It's been around since 1980s when David Cole brought it into, being known. And we do some of it in our school system already. We have programs such as CNA, we have within our classrooms, we're doing some experiential learning. But the whole point of this is to learn through hands-on experiences, or experiences in the community, internships, working with different businesses, trying to get kids, especially later on in high school, out of the classrooms, and they're focused more on how they're connecting to their world beyond school, because that's where they're headed. So I see this as taking a format of early on within the classroom and different things that younger ages can do, but then moving forward, as I said, really reaching out into the community and increasing our programs. Like I said, it exists. So I would like to talk with our educators and see where they are with this and where we could actually show some growth to help our students to kind of look beyond the classroom to their education experiences.
So I want to pin you down, narrow you down, so I can get a better handle on this. So the motion would be, members of the Board of Education, as discussed in prior workshops and as presented in previous white papers that I authored, I move that the Board of Ed do, and then finish my sentence if you can.
I move that the Board of Ed help to create more pathways for students to secure real-world experiences in their education.
Okay. So we got another minute or two, and I want to give you some time to pitch yourself. Answer, the question, why vote for you? They got 9 choices. No, you got more than 9. They got 12 choices. Voters pass over some and select others. Some voters only vote for 2 or 3, or 1, 2, or 3. So why you? What do you bring to the table?
Well, I think my strongest thing that I bring to the table is that I've been in the education world for many years, and I'm very involved in it and keep up to date just through my own profession, the areas that we need to be up to date in for educating our kids. And so I think I'm almost a step ahead of, when you're elected to the Board of Ed, that's a process in itself, and getting to know the process of it and how it works and the different elements. And I'm almost a step ahead because I know a lot of the educational terms and business that happens. So that puts me at an advantage, I think, when we're talking about things and we're trying to bring, initiatives forward, or trying to evaluate our board and our school district. So that would probably be my main point. I've worked with students, parents, educators, Board of Ed members, so I understand the nuances of how to work with people in different situations that involve education. I think all of that experience really brings it to the forefront.
You've done it. Let's wrap it up. Okay. Thanks for coming on to the Citizen Mike Show, and good luck in the election.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Hey, Mike Urban, thanks for coming on the Citizen Mike Show. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for having me tonight.
Yeah, I want to read a little bit from your resume so our viewers can get to know you, and then we'll get down to business after that. You wrote that you are an occupational therapy practitioner, educator, and advocate who has served the profession for over 17 years. You received your Master of Occupational Therapy from Duville College in Buffalo, New York. You got your Doctor of Occupational Therapy from Quinnipiac in 2016. And in 2006, you received your MBA, Masters of Business Administration, from the University of New Haven. You are a past president of the Connecticut Occupational Therapy Association. You've worked for the Department of Veteran Affairs prior to coming to the University of New Haven as the chief of prosthetics, and you served as an adjunct faculty at Sacred Heart University, Gannon University, and Lincoln College of New England. You're also certified Lean Six Sigma Black Belt. That's not the topic of the conversation tonight, though. Maybe another episode. Okay. Did I get everything right? There's more here, but in the interest of time, I kind of cut it. Got
That's
everything
fine.
right. Okay. So let's get down to business. And one of the topics that you picked goes as follows. Governor Lamont has issued a vaccine mandate. All educators were to get vaccinated by the deadline, and that deadline has come and gone. At least one teacher from Lyman Hall was terminated for his failure to comply. News reports say that the matter has been referred to the Board of Education. Please give us your thoughts on the issues, plural, raised by this narrative. What do you think?
When you look at the vaccine mandate in general, something I've spoken in the national media on just for employers across the board, you have to think about this is federal law. It's been actually, it goes back to 1905. There's been rulings where the U.S. Supreme Court has stated that states can basically make the states become a police state. So not saying that that's what we had to go to, but under federal law, the one thing I sort of have disagreed with Lamont's wording or the state's wording for some of the mandates that came out was they tried to actually avoid religious and exemptions at one point. And again, federal law stipulates that you can mandate it, but you still have to honor a religious or a health presumption for people who have medical conditions that can't get vaccinated. But again, it has to look for reasonable accommodations if possible. And even with that, for religion, unfortunately, that hasn't been a whole, with all of, the Pope and people saying go out and get vaccinated, that sort of eliminates those excuses or those people going that route. And then health. So, looking at this topic here and the situation here, I can't speak to what the board has been referred to specifically about this individual case. I do know that the teacher, was teacher of the year last year. He is someone that, if you look at diversity, diverse workforce, he is someone that is he's not Caucasian. So I mean, looking at these issues here and looking at the factors here that he chose not to get vaccinated for his personal reasons is something that he has a freedom to do. Unfortunately, with the state mandate, the state mandate is what it is, and we have to adhere to state law and enforce that. You see right now the federal government doing that at the federal level with contract workers, sort of forcing mandates through federal contracts. Same thing that we have here. So we have to, unfortunately, honor his choice not to, and the consequence can lead to termination in those cases if they don't meet one of the exemptions that are allowed under the laws.
All right, let me back up and clarify a couple of things. You talked about federal law, and I think you're referring to, but I'm not sure, a decision from the United States Supreme Court. Is that what you meant by federal law?
There's been several cases actually in federal, and they've actually challenged it recently. Yeah. So the earliest one under federal law goes back to the 1905 case, Jacobs versus Massachusetts. So that's the earliest where it all sort of started, and that's what even Supreme Justice Barrett actually had based one of her decisions more recently, not against teachers, but just against vaccine mandates, I believe, in a hospital system, as to why they wouldn't even hear the case, because it falls into the same principles and guidelines.
Yeah, so I didn't know you were going to bring that up, but I vaguely remember this whole case, and I again, check me if I go wrong, but the United States Supreme Court said that the government, under sort of inherent authority to protect the public welfare, can enact reasonable measures, depending on the circumstance. I think that was the principle, and I guess the greater the emergency, the greater the requirements, I suppose.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, along those lines, it upheld the authority of the states, although the states can do like a compulsory vaccination laws based upon at that time if there's a need, in which we're still in the public health emergency right now.
So what I'm hearing, I think, is that you bristle a little bit, I think, about the exemptions or lack thereof in the state of Connecticut, but you support the general principle of requiring vaccinations. Did I read you right?
At this point, I do, yes, I would encourage vaccinations. I mean, ultimately wearing a mask during the height of the pandemic, there's a lot that our country could have done. I've stated this so that unfortunately our public health response here in our nation has not been what it should be. Even the Chancellor of Germany said that her benchmark was against the United States, and they can't do that with this response. That's how poorly we've done. But you've seen other countries like New Zealand where, I mean, they did shut their borders. They were able to eliminate the virus completely just by wearing masks and mandating stuff without a vaccine. Now they're vaccinating, and the vaccines do help keep people from being hospitalized. You can still get the virus and spread the virus. We're seeing that with you saw that with the Provincetown outbreak earlier this summer. 80% of the people were vaccinated, fully vaccinated, and they still were infected, but none of them were hospitalized, none of them died. Yeah. So that's the benefit of it.
Let's change the subject. Another topic that you volunteered sort of to take on was this one. Should board members try to objectively assess how their school district is doing? How would you do that? And what would you do if you suspected the school district was underperforming? Integrate into your answer, if you can, your perspective on test scores. What do you think?
Yeah, so I think that we should be looking at how we are performing as a school board, as a school as a whole, but the board really should be looking at this. I looked at, they spoke in the public forum recordings, and I talked about our test scores. I brought up the mention of that. I look at some of the pay, like what we're spending as a school board across some other towns. And where some schools were, a comparable district, some people say is Milford, because they have multiple high schools of similar diversity and population for students. They have multiple middle schools, and they are spending a little bit more, overall as a budget than what we do. But at the same time, their rankings are much higher. Their performance is much better. But when you look at maybe another place such as West Haven, again, people perceive West Haven because it's a city, quote unquote, versus the town of Wallingford. They must have worse schools. They do spend actually a little bit less than what Wallingford does per student. And we think about looking at the revenue, how much we pay our superintendent of school, and any other, I don't see if there's no information publicly known if they get bonuses on performance, but we do try to match to be competitive to attract the best. But at the same time, any job you have a peer performance, you have clear objective measures, and every year you get a rating. If your school's not performing and you're in charge of the school, just as the board, people say we should be responsible as a board member. The superintendent should also they're the ones sort of operational or running the schools for us. We don't get involved with how the curriculum is designed, and I think that that's something that should be looked at, and maybe built in or how we would look at that. So thinking about how we look at this, Department of Education actually has resources on how to look at assessments, examples of across the nation, how school districts have measured performance, done their own assessments. Some of my quality management background is go look at the performance measures and see what can we, we had a big cut to the school district in 2006. The mayor wouldn't give us some money from the rainy day fund because it wasn't rainy enough. And since then, programs were cut. I know some special reading programs that were cut, the support staff were let go. And since then, I would love to see the data, see if that year we start seeing the test scores go down, more rapidly, or start at that point in time, and really look at when did our scores start dropping and what can we do.
Do you have an impression as to how Wallingford's test scores have been trending?
No, I don't have that. I don't have that data right now.
Suppose you 4 years from now you're elected and reelected, and 4 years from now you're unhappy with a trend. Mm-hmm. What can you do?
So that's where, again, I would look holistic at the entire system. I would look at our curriculum. Where are we putting our resources? It's easy for people to say it's infrastructure. We have old schools. The kids can't learn. Teachers can't teach in these environments. That's part of it. But if we're trying to have people memorize facts to test to a test, but we're not actually teaching them, that's stuff that I'll actually look at. We have dedicated staff and teachers here, but we also have some populations where people, this year I heard them say we can't finalize classrooms or bus routes and stuff like that because people are still registering and moving in and out of the town. Those are the factors I would be looking at to assess to determine if we can identify what the trends are, what our root causes. And the Department of Education has tools for education systems to use for root cause analysis. And then once we identify that, go after that 20%, the rule of thumb, 20% that has the most bang for our buck, and start there and see if that eliminates the other 80% of what we need to improve, or do we have to then do another project and work on it? And I would bring in teachers, parents, taxpayers, bring everyone in to help gather that data, look at it. It'd be a great capstone project for a high school student.
Want to switch topics on you, and because of time running short, we got to make this a shorter answer.
Yep.
It's a longer question, so here we go. I've detected in my reading a tension, nationally speaking, between adding resources devoted to programs for the gifted and talented, including advanced placement courses and the like, or adding resources for remedial and or vocational programs. Rephrased, this might be a push and pull between the champions of the A- students and the champions of the C students. So if the board had some added money to put into raising student achievement, where would it go and why?
Think about that. You know, it's easy to sit there and say, you know, people say to improve yourself, put it where your strengths are. And think about that. We have strong VOAG programs here. I mean, we have people come from other towns just to go to our vocational programs here. I would put my money into where we can strengthen those, you know, the resources for our C students, because potentially our test scores could be linked to some of those students struggling and get them the services they need. I hear of students who are struggling to get added services because of the way the state has, criteria laid out for getting additional support that's needed. And I think we can look without having to spend money to bring in extra support also to help those C students. And maybe, by partnering with neighboring schools, educational programs, and bringing students who need internships to come in and help support those students and the teachers at the same time. So that's where I would sort of put that money there, moving forward from there, and still respecting our A students, and we could still partner with other schools, colleges and stuff like that, to help give them services or a higher level learning that may not cost us anything at all. But if I had extra money, I'd throw it towards the C students.
Got it. So we have a couple of minutes to wrap up, and I want to do it with your pitch. When folks go to the polls, they don't have to vote for, they have 9 votes. They could vote for 2 or 3 people, or 3, 4, or 5. They can mix and match. They can do whatever they want, but they vote for some and pass over others when they go into the voting booth. So why should voters pick you?
Well, I think, one, I have fresh ideas. I have a strong background with, between the budgeting and the curriculum development, and I'm an advocate. You can see that in my long history between the national and state level for my profession, and what I've done for students who didn't have services. I volunteered my time to get them services and give them the assessments they needed. So knowing that I'll be there for the taxpayer, the students, and the teachers all at the same time is why you should be electing me.
Okay. Mike Urban, thanks for coming on the show, and good luck on election night.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hey, Jacqueline McFarlane, thanks for coming on the Citizen Mike Show. We appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited. I watch your show regularly, so
oh wow.
I'm excited
Okay,
to be here.
You got me where I live. Okay, so let me read a little bit of your bio. This is what you sent to me in part, and also what's on the Democratic Town Committee website. You wrote that you have a bachelor's of music and classical vocal performance. You were graduated from Western Connecticut Central University, State University, in 2006. You're thinking of going back to school, maybe UMass, in arts administration. You currently work as a banking analyst for Transact Campus, Inc., where you have been employed for 7.5 years. And prior to that, you worked at TD Bank for several years, where you were the head teller. And you also say on your website piece that you've devoted significant time to healthcare organizations, organizing Relay for Life events with the American Cancer Society, and multiple fundraisers for the National Organization for Rare Disorders. And you have broad public service, which includes time as secretary of the New Haven Chorale and 3 years as president of Stevens and Pond Hill PTO. Did I get anything wrong? I didn't include everything because in the interest of time, I can't, but so far so good?
So far, so good.
Let's get to the first question. We take care of business. So the first topic is how would or should board members try to objectively assess how their school district is doing And how would you do that? And what would you do if you suspected the board was underperforming? And integrate, if you can, into your answers, the role of test scores.
Right. So I think to a certain extent, we do need to be objective, especially when analyzing the hard data, like the test scores. We really need to look at those test scores, see how we're aligning our curriculum, and see where we can make modifications to bring those test scores up. I do know it's a big concern for a lot of our residents here in town. But I would also say that test scores aren't the be all and end all of, not the only measurement that we should use. We have to remember that behind every statistics and behind every test score is an actual child that have unique abilities and disadvantages. And to reduce them down to just a test score is doing them a disservice. And I think it also is a disservice to our teachers and administrators who have to worry about so much more these days within our schools. So I think really for the Board of Education, you have to try to take yourself out of the equation. You have to take your ego out of the equation, and you have to look at all of the data that you have. And even though it's hard, you have to hold yourself accountable to it. And you're going to have to hold the board accountable. And I think that's a tough thing to do, but I think it's a necessary step. You know, you have to be brave enough to say, we're not doing such a hot job here, and we need to rethink of how we're doing things.
So I need to ask you a follow-up. Other than test score data, what other data might you look at, and what other metrics would you look at? What other, and how would you get this information? And let me just follow up before you give you time to think about that. But I think any administration and any long-term incumbents on the Board of Ed, own the status quo. And of course they would say, we've been doing a good job. All the information is great. It may not be, there may be another side to the story, but maybe the board is supposed to be there to kind of double check that. Would you react to my comments that I just gave you?
Sure. So I know that we do that's climate studies within the schools, and it's done by, from the perspective of like our older students and like the parents for the elementary schools and everything. And I think, really taking that climate into consideration. I have 2 children in elementary schools. My son is currently in Pond Hill. He's a 3rd grader. He had maybe 2 years of schooling without a lockdown drill, right? My daughter has never known school without a lockdown drill. And those drills cause her such anxiety. She may hide it well because she always puts a brave face on, but she's completely distracted for the rest of the day. You know what I mean? So I think you have to take into consideration all these extra outside issues that maybe we didn't have as kids. I never had to do a lockdown drill in school, and think about the state of our society and where we are as a nation, unfortunately, and take that kind of thing into consideration. Take into the consideration that what's home life like, not that you can really quantify that on a higher level.
Yeah.
Individually, it does make an impact on how a child will perform in school.
So what would you do if you became concerned, let's say test scores were stuck or going in the wrong direction? Maybe anecdotally, you heard as a member of the board that staff was unhappy with policy. I think ripped from the headlines in a way, that comment I gave. How do you handle it? How would you handle that if you were elected?
At that point, you got to start asking questions, right? So you have to start, don't be afraid to talk to the teachers. I mean, I know they work for us. We're creating the policy. We're doing the budgeting and allocation of funds. So, in order to do that properly, we really need to know every aspect of what's happening in the schools, not just the administrators. Maybe we need to be more hands-on and getting more information directly from teachers to really combat that.
Okay, let's change a subject for a minute. The next topic I want to talk to you about goes as follows. I wrote to you, I have detected in my reading a tension nationally speaking between adding resources devoted to programs for the gifted and talented, including advanced placement courses and the like, or adding resources for remedial and/or vocational programs. Rephrase, this might be a push and pull between the champions of the A- students and the champions of the C students. So if the board had some extra resources to put into raising student achievement, where would it go?
I don't think you're going to like my answer. But I would say both. I think you have to treat both sections of the population equally. Listen, our A- students, they deserve to continue to be pushed and to challenge themselves. They need those challenges. I myself was one of those kids, when I was in high school, before I decided that, music was going to be my pathway. I was, looking into the AP classes and whatnot. And, some kids thrive on that kind of challenge. Other kids, not so much. Other kids, they struggle to be there every day. They struggle to be present every day. And you need to make sure that there's something worthwhile in those buildings for them, whether it be a specific vocation, a reason for them to keep going and keep trying. Some kids, it's just, I just need to graduate. I need to focus on getting this done so I can move on to doing this in my life. So I can move on to this next step or this next goal. And I really think both are just as important. I don't think one can have any more importance over the other.
The question that I just asked you was inspired by an article I read that discussed the word equity in the context of schools. And the author's point was that equity sometimes is a code word for bringing up let's say the lower half at the expense of the advanced placement kids or the upper half, and to sort of homogenize it. And that's what equity meant to this author. I'm not saying you do, but that's what inspired the question. Would you react to what I just said, the term equity, and any thoughts that article might inspire you?
It sounds like he's using equity more of like in a baseline sense, maybe trying to get all kids to a certain baseline. And again, each child is unique. Each child is going to have their own disadvantages that they have to overcome. More so than making sure that we have, the correct academic levels to inspire all kids. We want to make sure that we have something for them after school too, right? We want to make sure that we are inspiring them to find their own path into society. And I think that's really, really what the job of a school is to do, right? To create productive citizens for our society, so that they can, contribute to the overall. And I think that has to be the focus.
Okay. Before we go into the third, I want to just ask you a follow-up really to both the first two topics I asked you. One was performance and the other was the A students versus the C students. Do you have a perception? I know you're a challenger, you're not an incumbent, you don't have all the resources incumbents have, but do you have a perception as to how the Wallingford School District is doing with respect to test scores, the A students, the C students? Are we on the right trajectory, do you think, or do tweaks need to be made?
Like you said, I don't have all that information, right?
Yeah.
I will say, I can see I have one of each. I have a son who probably has an undiagnosed learning disability. I can see where he's struggling and I can see where we're not. our schools aren't meeting his needs, you know, and I have a daughter who it just comes so easy to her, you know, and she loves learning. She's always had a love for it. She doesn't get, what's the word that I'm looking for? She doesn't get thrown off by, you know, if something's harder, she'll totally accept that challenge, you know, whereas my son may shy away from it sometimes because he doesn't have the confidence that she has, because it's harder for him, you know. So I think that we really need to work on reaching all of our children, and I think that judging by the overall test scores that I've seen, and seeing that we are in decline, we do need to do some realignment. We do need to look at that curriculum, and we do need to see where we're struggling and how we can raise those scores for sure.
Let me change the subject on you. And this is the last topic. Is there anything specific that you would want to achieve if you were elected? I mean, something very specific that you could investigate and research and, you know, collaborate on and workshop on, but at the end, eventually put on the agenda and vote on. Is there something specific you can describe for us?
I would say that there are a couple of things that I think are pretty specific. In regards to our older students, I'd like to see an increase in the pathway options that we have. I know that we have, you know, the CNA program where we work with Goodwin College, I believe it is. And we have the culinary arts. I'd like to see us offer more in terms of preparing students for careers in green technologies. That's going to be a big part of the future, especially with current legislation going through and timelines that have been placed. And I'd also like to see increased pathway options into the creative arts, into creative economics that covers such a broad spectrum of, you know, it covers research and development, it covers architecture and film and publishing, and that's a really large part of our economic market. So I would like to see some pathways in there for our younger children. I'd really like to see, yeah.
So I need to interrupt you in the interest of time, but I want to get it even more narrow. You know, I'm hearing what you're saying, but it sounds, you know, like an aspirational goal. But does that take the form of a motion on the Board of Ed to add a certain amount of money to expand a certain pathway program? Does it take a motion to adjust the curriculum, and then you hear, well, we don't have the teachers for that, and then you make another motion, you know, to add another several $100,000? How does it look, you know, if you're elected?
Honestly, I don't know how that process goes, right? So I don't have all the answers for you there, but I got some determination, and I don't usually take no for an answer. I will find a way.
I believe you too. All right, I believe you. So look, we got a couple of minutes left, and let me ask you the big question. Voters, of course, have choices when they go to the polls. They could vote for one person, they could vote for 9, or anything in between. They pass over some and they select others. So why should voters select you?
I think I bring a different perspective to the board. You have a lot of people who are already in education, a lot of people who see things a very specific way. Sometimes you're so close to the subject matter that you kind of become blind to the things that are right in front of you. And sometimes you need to take a step back and see the whole picture in order to be objective, right? So I think I can offer that. Like you said in the beginning, I am a banking analyst, so I have a keen attention for detail. I tend to work very logically, and I'm very thorough with my work. And I would be the same way for the Board of Education, for sure.
Okay, you've done it. Let's make that the final word. Thanks for coming on the Citizen Mike Show. We do appreciate it, and good luck on election night.
Thanks for having me.
Okay.
Have a great day.